The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, hungry and mean. It howled through the gaps in the buildings of Cutter's Ridge, rattling shutters and driving needles of snow into every crack and crevice. The kind of cold that didn't just bite, it burrowed deep, settled into your bones, made you wonder if you'd ever feel warm again. Caleb Mercer pulled his coat tighter and kept walking. He'd learned a long time ago not to linger anywhere. Not in towns, not in conversations, not in the kind of warmth that made a man soft. Cutter's Ridge was just another stop, another place to resupply before moving on. He'd stayed 2 nights in a boarding house that smelled like boiled cabbage and old tobacco, and that was already one night too many. The street was empty at this hour, that gray space between night and dawn where the world felt held in suspension. Most folks had sense enough to stay inside. Caleb would have done the same if he hadn't needed to settle his bill before the boarding house keeper woke up and tried to talk him into staying another day. The woman had a way of looking at him that made him uncomfortable, like she was searching for something he'd deliberately left behind. He was almost to the livery stable when he saw it. A wagon, listing badly to one side with a broken axle, abandoned at the far end of the street near where the town gave way to open country. Nothing unusual about that. Wagons broke down all the time, and most folks had enough sense to get inside before the cold killed them. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the canvas cover moved slightly, not quite in rhythm with the wind. Maybe it was instinct, that animal part of him that had kept him alive this long. He stood there for a moment, breath steaming in the frigid air, every sensible part of him saying to keep walking. He didn't keep walking. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached the wagon. Up close, he could see it had been there a while. Snow had drifted against the wheels, and ice crystals covered the exposed wood. He reached the back and pulled aside the canvas flap. She was curled in the corner, wrapped in a blanket so thin it might as well have been paper. Her lips had that bluish tint that meant hypothermia wasn't far off. She wasn't moving, but he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Still alive. Barely. "Hey!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "You hear me?" No response. Caleb glanced back toward the town. The smart thing would be to get the sheriff, let the law handle it. But the sheriff in Cutter's Ridge was a drunk who spent most of his time in the saloon, and by the time anyone did anything useful, this woman would be dead. He swore under his breath and climbed into the wagon. She was lighter than he expected when he gathered her up, blanket and all. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. She felt insubstantial, like she'd been wasting away for a while. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her back toward town, and he could feel her trembling even through the blanket. "You picked a hell of a place to freeze to death," he muttered. The boarding house was closer than the doctor's office, and Mrs. Hadley, for all her annoying qualities, was at least competent. He kicked at the door until she opened it, her face shifting from irritation to alarm when she saw what he was carrying. "Lord have mercy, Caleb Mercer. What did you—" "Found her in a wagon. She's half frozen. You got somewhere warm I can put her?" Mrs. Hadley was already moving, leading him to a room at the back of the house near the kitchen, where the heat from the stove kept things warmer. She pulled back the quilts on the bed and stepped aside as Caleb laid the woman down. "I'll get more blankets and some hot water, Mrs." Hadley said, already bustling toward the door. "You stay with her. Sometimes when they're this far gone, they stop breathing when you're not looking." Then she was gone, and Caleb was left standing beside the bed, looking down at a stranger he'd just complicated his life for. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly, mid-20s maybe, dark hair that had come loose from whatever she'd had it pinned in. Her face was thin, all sharp angles and pale skin, with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from more than just one cold night. She wore a dress that might have been nice once, but was now stained and torn at the hem. No coat, no proper shoes, just thin boots that wouldn't keep anyone warm. This wasn't someone who'd just had a wagon breakdown. This was someone running. Mrs. Hadley came back with an armload of quilts and a basin of warm water. She shooed Caleb away from the bed and started the practical work of warming someone back from the edge. He watched from the doorway as the boarding house keeper worked, her movements efficient and sure. "She got a name?" Mrs. Hadley asked without looking up. "Didn't ask." "Didn't think you would." She wrung out a cloth in the warm water and pressed it to the woman's hands. "You planning to stay until she wakes up?" "Haven't decided yet." Well, you brought her here. Least you can do is explain to her why she's not in that wagon anymore. Caleb didn't answer. He leaned against the doorframe and watched as color slowly started to return to the woman's face. It took longer than he liked, long enough that he started to worry Mrs. Hadley's warning about people just stopping breathing might come true. But finally, she stirred. It wasn't much at first. Just a twitch of her fingers, a slight movement of her head. Then her eyes opened. Brown, he noticed, dark and wary even in that first moment of consciousness. She looked at Mrs. Hadley, then passed her to where Caleb stood in the doorway. "Easy now," Mrs. Hadley said softly. "You're safe. You're inside, you're warm, and you're going to be fine." The woman tried to sit up, and Mrs. Hadley gently pushed her back down. "None of that yet. You were half dead from cold when this man brought you in. You'll stay put until I say otherwise." "Where?" The woman's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. She swallowed and tried again. "Where am I?" "Cutter's Ridge, my boarding house. You were in a wagon out on the edge of town." Recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by something that looked like fear. Her eyes went to Caleb again, sharper this time, assessing. "You brought me here?" He nodded. "Why?" It was a fair question and one he didn't have a good answer for. Seemed like the thing to do. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Most people aren't me. That almost got a smile out of her. Almost. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, some of that initial wariness had settled into something closer to resignation. "I don't have money to pay you." "Didn't ask for any." Mrs. Hadley stood up, gathering the basin and cloths. "I'll get you something to eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." She paused at the door and looked at Caleb. "You staying or going?" He should go. Every instinct he had told him to walk away, settle his bill, and be gone before this got complicated. But something kept him rooted there in the doorway. "I'll stay a bit." Mrs. Hadley nodded and left them alone. The silence stretched out, not quite uncomfortable, but not easy either. The woman studied him from the bed, and he let her look. He was used to people trying to figure him out. It came with being a drifter, with having the kind of face that didn't give much away. "You got a name?" she asked finally. "Caleb Mercer." "Eliza Vance." "That's your real name?" Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Does it matter?" "Suppose not." She shifted under the quilts, wincing slightly. "How long was I out there?" "Don't know. Wagon looked like it had been there a while." 2 days. She said it quietly, like she was admitting to something shameful. "The axle broke and I couldn't fix it. Thought about trying to walk into town, but..." She stopped, shook her head. "Doesn't matter now." 2 days in this cold, you're lucky you didn't lose fingers or toes." "Lucky." She repeated the word like it tasted strange. "Yeah, lucky." Mrs. Hadley came back with a bowl of soup and a thick slice of bread. She helped Eliza sit up enough to eat, propping pillows behind her back. Caleb watched as she ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned the hard way that eating too fast after going without was a mistake. When she was done, Mrs. Hadley took the bowl and fixed Caleb with a meaningful look. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. You, young lady, need to rest." After she left, Eliza leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes. For a moment, Caleb thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she spoke without opening her eyes. "You don't strike me as the charitable type, Mr. Mercer." "That's so. Man who lives like you do, always moving, never settling, doesn't usually stop to help strangers." "You don't know how I live." "Don't I?" She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Everything about you says drifter. The way you stand like you're ready to leave any second. The coat that's seen too many miles. The fact that you're still wearing your gun inside a boarding house." She paused. "Men like you don't get involved. So why did you?" It was a good question. He'd been asking himself the same thing since he'd pulled aside that wagon cover. "Maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am." That did get a smile, small and brief, but real. "Or maybe you're too decent for your own good." Nobody's ever accused me of that before. There's a first time for everything. The conversation lapsed again. Outside, he could hear the town starting to wake up. The sound of doors opening, voices calling out, the clop of horses' hooves on frozen ground. Normal sounds. the kind that marked the rhythm of ordinary life. Nothing about this felt ordinary. "You should get some more sleep," he said finally. "You've been through hell. Will you be here when I wake up?" "Probably not. That's honest, at least." She pulled the quilts up higher. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for not leaving me to freeze." He nodded and turned to go, got as far as the door before her voice stopped him. "If you're planning to leave town, you might want to do it soon." He turned back. "Why's that?" "Because trouble's coming, and when it gets here, anyone near me is going to get caught in it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Caleb studied her face, saw the truth of it written there in the tight line of her mouth, the shadows under her eyes. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that doesn't ask questions before it starts shooting." "You running from the law?" "No, something worse." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. After a moment, she closed her eyes again, done with the conversation. Caleb stood there a moment longer, then walked out, pulling the door shut behind him. Mrs. Hadley was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. She looked up when he came in. "She going to make it?" "Physically, yeah. Everything else—" He trailed off, shook his head. "She tell you what she's running from?" "How'd you know she's running?" Mrs. Hadley gave him a look that suggested she hadn't been born yesterday. "Caleb Mercer, I've been running a boarding house in frontier towns for 20 years. I know what running looks like. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. Not my problem." "You made it your problem when you carried her through my door. Just did what anyone would do." "That's a lie, and we both know it." She went back to kneading, her voice gentler when she spoke again. "You're a good man, even if you work hard to convince people otherwise. But this girl, whatever she's mixed up in, it's dangerous. I can feel it. All the more reason to stay out of it." "That what you're going to do?" "Planning on it." Mrs. Hadley didn't say anything, but her silence spoke volumes. Caleb left her to her bread and went to his own room, intending to gather his things and settle his bill. But when he got there, he found himself sitting on the edge of the bed instead, staring at the worn floorboards. Trouble's coming. He believed her. Question was whether he'd be around when it arrived. The decision should have been easy. By mid-morning, he should have been gone. Another town in his wake, another problem avoided. That was how he'd lived for the past 5 years, moving, never connecting, never getting involved in anyone's life but his own. But noon found him still in Cutter's Ridge, sitting in the saloon nursing a whiskey he didn't really want. The place was mostly empty at this hour. A few old-timers playing cards in the corner, the bartender wiping down glasses with a rag that had seen better days. Sheriff Davies was at his usual spot at the end of the bar, working on what was probably his 4th drink of the day. "Heard you played hero this morning," the bartender said, refilling Caleb's glass without being asked. Word traveled fast in small towns. "Wouldn't call it that." "Found some woman half froze in a wagon, carried her to Hadley's place. That's what I heard." "News travels." "Always does." The bartender leaned on the bar, lowering his voice. "She pretty?" "She's half dead, didn't notice." "You noticed." The bartender grinned. "You staying around?" "Haven't decided." That was a lie. He'd decided the moment he saw Eliza Vance in that wagon bed. He just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. The saloon door banged open, bringing with it a gust of cold air, and 3 men Caleb had never seen before. They had the look of hired muscle. Hard faces, harder eyes, guns worn with the ease of men who used them regularly. The kind of men who brought trouble wherever they went. They spread out, one staying by the door while the other 2 approached the bar. The one in front was tall, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He had the bearing of someone used to giving orders and having them followed. "We're looking for someone," Scarface said, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "Woman, mid-20s, dark hair, would have come through here in the last week or so." The bartender's eyes flicked to Caleb just for a second, but it was enough. Scarface noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like that noticed everything. "You seen her?" he asked the bartender. "Lots of folks come through Cutter's Ridge." "That's not what I asked." Scarface's hand rested on his gun, casual but clear. "I asked if you've seen her." The bartender swallowed. "Can't say I remember every face that comes through." "How about you?" Scarface turned his attention to Caleb. You look like someone who pays attention. Seen a woman matching that description? Caleb took a slow drink of his whiskey, buying time to think. Everything in him said to walk away, to give them what they wanted and let whatever was going to happen, happen. Not his problem, not his fight. Nope. The lie came out easy, natural. And in that moment, Caleb knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Scarface studied him, those cold eyes searching for deception. You sure about that? Pretty sure I'd remember. That's so. Scarface smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because we heard different. Heard someone brought a woman into the boarding house this morning. Someone fitting your description. Behind him, Caleb heard the sound of guns being drawn, quiet metal whispers that spoke louder than words. The two other men had positioned themselves strategically, one covering the door, the other the rest of the room. Sheriff Davies chose that moment to finally stir, lifting his head from his drink. Now, gentlemen, there's no need for... Shut up. Scarface didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Caleb. Last chance. Where is she? Caleb set down his glass very carefully. His own gun was within reach, but 3 against 1 were bad odds, even on a good day. Don't know what you're talking about. You're lying. That your professional opinion? It's a fact. Scarface's hand moved to his gun. And I don't like liars. Seems like a personal problem. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. The old-timers in the corner had stopped their card game, and the bartender had backed away from the bar, smart enough to get out of the line of fire. Then a voice came from the doorway. That's enough. Everyone turned. Eliza stood there, wrapped in a coat someone had loaned her, face pale but set with determination. She looked steadier than she had any right to, considering she'd been on death's door a few hours ago. Eliza. Scarface's voice was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. We've been looking for you. I know. Mr. Garrett's been worried. You left without saying goodbye. I didn't think he'd notice. You thought wrong. Scarface took a step toward her. Time to go home. I'm not going anywhere with you, Jack. So they knew each other. That wasn't surprising, but the way she said his name, like it tasted bitter, told Caleb there was history there. Bad history. Jack spread his hands. The picture of reasonableness. Come on now, don't make this difficult. You know how Mr. Garrett gets when he's disappointed. I don't care how he gets. I'm not his property. Debts make you property, sweetheart. You know that. I don't owe him anything. Those were my father's debts, not mine. Your father's dead. Debts pass to family. That's how it works. Caleb stood up slowly, drawing Jack's attention back to him. She says she's not going. Seems pretty clear to me. Jack's expression hardened. This doesn't concern you. You're in my saloon threatening people. That makes it my concern. Your saloon? Jack laughed. You're just passing through, same as anyone. Walk away while you still can. Not much for taking advice. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Jack's hand moved toward his gun again, and Caleb knew they were seconds from violence. Then Eliza moved. She was fast, faster than Caleb would have given her credit for in her weakened state. She had a gun in her hand, small but lethal at close range, pointed directly at Jack's head. Nobody's taking me anywhere, she said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled slightly. You go back and tell Garrett I'm done. He can consider my father's debt paid in full with all the years I worked for him. Jack didn't look worried. If anything, he looked amused. You really think you're going to shoot me, Eliza? You're not a killer. No, but I'm desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jack raised his hands slowly, backing toward the door. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. Garrett doesn't let things go. You know that better than anyone. Then he's going to have to come get me himself. Jack smiled that cold smile again. Oh, he will. And when he does, you'll wish you'd come quietly. He looked at Caleb. You too, hero. You just bought yourself a world of trouble. Then they were gone, the door swinging shut behind them with a sound like finality. The silence that followed was absolute. Eliza lowered the gun slowly, and Caleb could see the adrenaline drain out of her, leaving her swaying on her feet. He crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her arm before she fell. Easy. I'm fine. You're not fine. You can barely stand. I stood long enough. She pulled free of his grip with more strength than he expected. You should have let them take me. That what you wanted? It would have been safer for you. I don't do things because they're safe. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or a recognition. Two people who'd spent their lives running from different things suddenly finding themselves running in the same direction. They'll come back, she said quietly, and next time they won't talk first. I know. So what are we going to do? We. Such a small word, but it changed everything. Caleb looked out the window at the gray sky, the frozen street, the vast wilderness beyond. He'd been running for 5 years and he was tired, but maybe, just maybe, running toward something was different than running away. We leave, he said, tonight, before they can regroup. And go where? North, into the mountains. Country's rough up there, but a man who knows his way can disappear pretty easy. You know your way? Well enough. Eliza studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but Mercer? Yeah? Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. It was the same question she'd asked before, and he still didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to examine it too closely. Maybe I'm tired of running alone. She smiled at that, small and sad and genuine. Yeah, me too. Tip. They left Cutter's Ridge 3 hours after sunset, when the moon was high enough to see by, but the town was quiet. Mrs. Hadley had packed them supplies without asking questions, though the look she gave Caleb spoke volumes. You take care of her, was all she said. Planning on it. And yourself. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that, Caleb thought, but he just nodded. The cold was brutal, even worse than it had been that morning. The kind of cold that made every breath hurt, that turned exposed skin numb in minutes. They had 2 horses. One Caleb had owned, one he'd borrowed from the livery with a promise to send payment later, and enough supplies for maybe a week if they were careful. Eliza rode without complaint, wrapped in every piece of warm clothing they'd been able to scrounge. She was still weak, he could tell, but she was also determined. That counted for something. They rode north, keeping off the main trails, following paths that Caleb knew from previous travels. Behind them, Cutter's Ridge disappeared into the darkness, one more town left behind. Ahead was nothing but wilderness and whatever waited for them there. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses. Caleb built a small fire in a protected hollow, just enough to warm their hands and heat some coffee. Eliza sat close to the flames, staring into them like she could read her future there. Tell me about Garrett, Caleb said. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. My father was a gambler. Not a good one. He worked for Garrett sometimes, running messages, collecting debts. Small stuff. But he had a habit of betting money he didn't have. She paused, wrapped her hands around her tin cup. When he died, he owed Garrett $5,000. Money I didn't have and no way to get. So Garrett took you instead. Offered me employment, he called it. Working in his saloon, serving drinks, keeping the customers happy. Said I could work off the debt. He even drew up papers, made it legal. But it wasn't legal. Oh, it was. Everything Garrett does is legal. He's careful that way. But legal doesn't mean right. She looked at him across the fire. I worked for him for 3 years. 3 years, and according to his books, I still owe him $4,000. He was never going to let you pay it off. No. And when I realized that, I ran. Took what money I'd managed to hide away and just ran. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Made it almost 100 miles before the wagon broke down. Would have died there if you hadn't found me. How'd they track you so fast? Garrett has people everywhere, eyes and ears in every town within 200 miles. I knew it was a risk, but I was desperate. Caleb poured more coffee, thinking. Men like Garrett, men who treated people as property and debts as chains, they were everywhere on the frontier. The law was supposed to protect people, but the law was only as good as the people enforcing it. And in most towns, people like Garrett had the law in their pocket. This Jack character, he said. He Garrett's enforcer? Jack Reeves. Yeah. He's been with Garrett for years, does all the dirty work, handles all the problems. She met his eyes. He's good at his job, Mercer. Really good. We won't be able to hide from him forever. Don't need forever, just need long enough. Long enough for what? To figure something out. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. They finished their coffee in silence, then doused the fire and rode on. The mountains grew closer as the night wore on, dark shapes against a darker sky. The temperature dropped even further, and Caleb could feel the cold seeping through his coat, settling into his bones. Beside him, Eliza rode with her head down, shoulders hunched against the wind. He should have left her in that wagon. Should have walked away when Jack and his men came into the saloon. Should have done 100 things differently. But he hadn't. And now here they were, two people running from different pasts, headed into an uncertain future with nothing but each other and whatever grit they could muster. Dawn found them 20 miles from Cutter's Ridge, deep in the foothills where the trees grew thick and the trails narrowed to barely more than game paths. They stopped in a small clearing to rest, and Caleb helped Eliza down from her horse. She was shaking from exhaustion and cold, barely able to stand. We need to stop for a while, he said. Get some real rest. They're coming. I know, but if we push too hard, we won't be able to run when we need to. He led her to a fallen log and made her sit. I'll keep watch. You sleep. I don't think I can. Try anyway. She did, leaning against the log with her coat pulled tight around her. Within minutes, exhaustion won out over fear, and she was asleep. Caleb stood watch, his rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the trees. The forest was quiet except for the wind in the branches and the occasional call of a bird. Peaceful. Deceptive. Somewhere behind them, Jack Reeves and his men were coming. Maybe hours away, maybe less. And when they caught up, because they would catch up eventually, there would be blood. The question was whose. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink, Caleb made himself a promise. He'd gotten Eliza into this by lying to Jack, by choosing to help when walking away would have been smarter. Now he'd see it through, whatever that took, whatever it cost. The cold wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of more snow. Caleb pulled his coat tighter and kept watching the trail behind them, waiting for the moment when running would no longer be enough. That moment was coming. He could feel it. Eliza woke to the sound of branches snapping under snow. Her hand went to the gun at her waist before her eyes were fully open, instinct overriding exhaustion. Caleb was already on his feet, rifle raised, scanning the tree line. Easy, he said quietly. Just a deer. She watched the animal pick its way through the clearing, oblivious to their presence. Her heart was still racing, adrenaline flooding her system. Every sound felt like a threat now. Every shadow could be Jack Reeves. How long was I out? Couple hours, sun's almost directly overhead. We should move. Already saddled the horses. He lowered the rifle and looked at her. You eat something? Not hungry. Wasn't asking if you were hungry. Asked if you ate. She wanted to argue, but the look on his face said it wouldn't get her anywhere. Men like Caleb Mercer didn't waste words on things that didn't matter. She pulled out a piece of dried meat from the supplies and forced herself to chew, even though it tasted like leather in her dry mouth. They rode deeper into the mountains as the afternoon wore on, the terrain growing rougher with each mile. The horses struggled through snowdrifts that came up to their knees, breath steaming in the freezing air. Eliza's fingers had gone numb inside her gloves, and she'd lost feeling in her toes an hour ago. Caleb led them through a series of switchbacks that seemed to lead nowhere, doubling back on their own trail, crossing streams to hide their scent. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, who knew how to disappear when disappearing mattered. You've run from people before, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer right away, guiding his horse around a fallen tree. Yeah. What did you do? What makes you think I did anything? Men don't learn to run like this without a reason. He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice flat and distant. 5 years ago, I killed a man. The words hung in the cold air between them. Eliza waited, knowing there was more. He needed killing, Caleb continued. Was beating a woman half to death outside a saloon in Kansas. I told him to stop. He went for his gun instead. He paused. Turned out he was a deputy marshal's brother. The marshal didn't care much about the circumstances, just wanted revenge. So you ran. Seems smarter than hanging, and you've been running ever since. Until this morning, yeah. She understood what he was saying. He'd stopped running when he helped her. Traded one kind of trouble for another. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For dragging you into this. Nobody dragged me. I made a choice. A stupid choice. He actually smiled at that, brief but genuine. Won't argue with you there. They rode in silence after that. The only sounds, the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the wind whistling through the pines. The sun was starting its descent toward the western peaks when Caleb suddenly pulled up short, holding up a hand for silence. Eliza froze, straining to hear what had caught his attention. At first there was nothing. Then she heard it. Voices, distant but getting closer. Male voices, rough and purposeful. Off the horses, Caleb whispered. Now. They dismounted quickly, and he led them and the horses off the trail into a dense thicket of evergreens. The branches were low enough to provide cover, but high enough that they could see through. Caleb positioned them so they had a clear view of the trail while remaining hidden. The voices grew louder. 3 men on horseback came into view, moving fast despite the difficult terrain. Eliza's stomach dropped when she recognized them. Jack Reeves rode in front, his scarred face set in grim determination. The 2 men with him were the same ones from the saloon. Trail's fresh, one of them said, dismounting to examine the snow. Can't be more than an hour ahead. Then we're closing the gap. Jack's voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. Garrett wants her back before the week's out, dead or alive, his exact words. Dead or alive. Eliza felt Caleb tense beside her. What about the man? The third rider asked. What about him? Garrett say anything about him? Garrett doesn't care about him, but I do. Jack's hand rested on his gun. Man makes me look like a fool. He pays for it. They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching the hunters discuss their prey. Finally, Jack remounted and they continued up the trail, moving in the exact direction Caleb and Eliza had been heading. They waited until the voices faded completely before moving. Caleb studied the trail, his expression thoughtful. They're tracking us by the obvious route, he said quietly. Which means we go a different way. There is no other way. This trail is the only one through these mountains that doesn't require climbing equipment. Who said anything about trails? He led them east, away from the established path and into terrain that made Eliza's heart sink. The slope was steep and treacherous, covered in loose rock hidden beneath the snow. The horses balked at first, but Caleb coaxed them forward with patience and firm hands. This is insane, Eliza said, her horse slipping for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Yeah, well, insane is harder to track. They descended into a narrow canyon that cut between 2 peaks, the walls rising so high on either side that the sky became a thin ribbon of gray overhead. Water trickled somewhere nearby, the sound echoing off the rock. It was colder here, the sun never quite reaching the canyon floor. Halfway through, Eliza's horse lost its footing on an ice-slicked rock. The animal went down hard, throwing her clear. She hit the ground and rolled, coming to a stop against a boulder that knocked the air from her lungs. Caleb was there before she could get her breath back, pulling her to her feet. You hurt? Don't think so. She tried to put weight on her left ankle and immediately regretted it. Pain shot up her leg, white-hot and nauseating. Let me see. It's fine. It's not fine. Sit down. She sat. He removed her boot carefully, his hands surprisingly gentle. Even through the sock, she could see the swelling. Not broken, he said after a moment. But it's a bad sprain. You're not walking on this for a few days. We don't have a few days. No, we don't. He looked at the horse, which had managed to get back on its feet but was favoring its right front leg. Horse is lame too. Can't carry you. So what do we do? Caleb stood, scanning the canyon walls. There's a cave system up ahead, if I remember right. We hole up there for the night, give you and the horse time to rest. They'll catch up. Maybe. But if we keep pushing like this, you'll really hurt yourself, and then we'll have no chance at all. He offered her his hand. Come on, lean on me. She did, hating how weak she felt, how dependent. Her whole life she'd prided herself on taking care of herself, never needing anyone. Now here she was, barely able to stand without help. The cave was exactly where Caleb remembered it, a dark opening in the canyon wall, hidden behind a fall of ice and rock. Inside, it opened into a larger chamber, dry and relatively sheltered from the wind. Not warm by any stretch, but better than being exposed. Caleb got a fire going while Eliza sat with her back against the cave wall, her injured ankle elevated on a makeshift cushion of pine boughs. The firelight threw dancing shadows across the rough stone, and for the first time in days she felt something close to safe. Thank you, she said. For what? For not leaving me when this got difficult. Day's not over yet. She smiled despite herself. You ever just accept gratitude? Not really my strong suit. He handed her some dried meat and hardtack, then settled across the fire from her. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the canyon like something alive and angry. Snow began to fall, visible through the cave opening, thick, heavy flakes that would cover their tracks within hours. How long have you been running? Caleb asked. The question caught her off guard. From Garrett. 3 weeks. No, I mean before that. Before your father died. You got the look of someone who's been running their whole life. Eliza was quiet for a moment, surprised by how easily he'd read her. My mother left when I was 6, just walked out one day and never came back. My father blamed me for it, said if I'd been a better daughter, she would have stayed. That's bullshit. Maybe. But I believed it for a long time. She poked at the fire with a stick. After she left, we moved around a lot. Never stayed anywhere longer than a few months. My father was always chasing the next big score, the next game that would make him rich. It never did. And when he died, I thought maybe I could finally stop running, build a life somewhere, put down roots. She laughed, bitter. Lasted about 3 days before Garrett showed up with those papers. Why didn't you go to the law? The law works for men like Garrett. Sheriff in that town was on his payroll. I tried talking to a lawyer once. He showed me the contract my father signed. It was legal, every word of it. Garrett made sure of that. Caleb was quiet, staring into the flames. My father was a preacher, he said finally. Traveled from town to town, setting up revivals, collecting money from people who didn't have any to spare. I watched him lie to their faces, promise them salvation, then leave with their last dollars. That why you left? Part of it. The other part was when I figured out I was just another con to him, the dutiful son, proof that his teachings worked. Never mind that he beat me bloody every time I questioned anything. He looked at her across the fire. Point is, I get it. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. We're a pair, aren't we? Seems like. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling toward the cave ceiling. Outside, the storm intensified, and Eliza found herself grateful for Caleb's stubbornness in stopping. They would have frozen to death out there. Can I ask you something? She said. Shoot. Why did you really help me? And don't give me that line about not being smart. There's more to it than that. He took his time answering, and she wondered if she'd pushed too far. Then he spoke, his voice low. About 6 months ago, I was in a town in Colorado. Saw a woman getting beaten by her husband in the street. Broad daylight, people everywhere. And you know what everyone did? Nothing. Nothing. They walked right past like it wasn't happening, and I did too. He met her eyes. I walked past because it wasn't my problem, wasn't my business. Found out later he killed her that night. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I could have stopped it, could have done something. Instead, I kept my head down and kept moving. He added another branch to the fire. When I saw you in that wagon, I thought about that woman. Thought about how easy it would be to walk past again, and I just couldn't. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Sometimes silence was better than words. They sat like that for a long time, the fire slowly burning down, the storm raging outside. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with Eliza again. She tried to fight it, tried to stay alert, but her eyes kept drifting closed. Sleep, Caleb said. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'll rest later. Go on. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She pulled her coat tighter and let herself drift off, the sound of the wind and crackling fire fading into darkness. She woke to Caleb's hand over her mouth. Her eyes snapped open. It was still dark, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Caleb's face was inches from hers, his expression tense. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. "They're outside." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could hear it now, voices, muffled by the storm, but definitely there. Men talking, searching. Caleb moved silently to the cave entrance and peered out. Eliza sat up carefully, reaching for her gun. Her ankle throbbed, but she pushed the pain aside. "How many?" she whispered. "3. Jack and his men. They can't know we're here. They're checking every cave in the canyon. It's only a matter of time." He came back to her, his expression grim. "We need to make a choice, fight or hide." "Hide where?" "This cave doesn't go deeper." "No, but there's a ledge about 20 feet up the wall. If we can get up there before they look inside, we might have a chance." She looked at her ankle. "I can't climb." "I'll help you." "Caleb, we don't have time to argue." He was already moving, gathering their supplies, kicking snow over the remains of the fire. "Come on." The climb was a nightmare. Every movement sent pain lancing through Eliza's ankle, and she had to bite down on her coat sleeve to keep from crying out. Caleb went first, finding handholds in the rock, then reached back to pull her up. Her fingers were so cold she could barely grip the stone. Halfway up, she slipped. Caleb caught her wrist, his grip iron tight. "I got you," he said. "Don't look down. Just focus on the next handhold." She made it to the ledge on sheer determination and Caleb's strength. They pressed themselves back into a narrow depression in the rock, just as light spilled into the cave below. "Check it," Jack's voice echoed off the stone walls. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Eliza held her breath, every muscle tensed. From their vantage point, she could see one of Jack's men enter the cave, holding a lantern high. The light swept across the floor, illuminating the churned snow where they'd been sitting, the kicked-over fire. "Someone was here," the man called out. "Fire's still warm." Jack entered the cave, his scarred face illuminated by the lantern. He knelt by the fire, touching the ashes. "Can't be more than an hour old." "Think they heard us coming?" "Probably." Jack stood, scanning the cave. "Check the back." Eliza's pulse thundered in her ears. The man with the lantern walked deeper into the cave, the light swinging wildly. Any second now, he would look up. Any second, they would be found. But the man's search was cursory, lazy. He glanced around without much interest, then headed back to the entrance. Nothing, just an empty cave. Jack stood there a moment longer, his eyes sweeping the darkness. For a terrible second, Eliza thought he was looking directly at her. Then he turned and walked out. "They're close," he said to his men outside. "The storm is slowing them down, same as us. We'll make camp here, wait it out. Come first light, we'll have them." The voices faded as they moved away from the cave entrance. Eliza waited until she couldn't hear anything but the wind before she allowed herself to breathe normally. "That was too close," she whispered. "Yeah." Caleb was pressed against the rock beside her, so close she could feel the heat of him. "We're stuck here until they leave." "Could be hours. It could be all night." The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for both of them. There was no room to move, no way to get comfortable. Eliza's ankle throbbed steadily, and the cold was seeping through her coat, settling into her bones. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Stop apologizing." "I can't help it. You'd be long gone by now if it wasn't for me." "Maybe. Or maybe I'd be dead in a ditch somewhere. Who knows?" He shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Point is, we're here now. Might as well make the best of it." "Is this your idea of making the best of it? Hiding on a freezing ledge while 3 armed men camp below us?" "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound pretty bad." She laughed despite herself, quiet and brief, but real. "You have a strange sense of humor, Mercer." "It's either laugh or cry." "I prefer laughing." They fell silent again. Below, they could see the faint glow of a fire through the cave entrance as Jack and his men settled in for the night. Voices drifted up occasionally, too muffled to make out words. Hours passed. The storm continued to rage outside, and the temperature dropped even further. Eliza couldn't feel her feet anymore, and her teeth wouldn't stop chattering no matter how hard she tried to control them. "Come here," Caleb said. "What?" "You're freezing to death. Come here." He pulled her against him, wrapping his coat around both of them. The warmth was immediate and shocking. She wanted to protest, to maintain some dignity, but she was too cold to care. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah." She was surprised to find it was true. "Thank you." "Don't mention it." Pressed against him like this, she could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. It was oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this mess. "What will we do when they leave?" she asked quietly. "Keep moving. Put as much distance between us and them as possible." "And then?" "Haven't figured that part out yet." "Reassuring." "I don't deal in reassuring. I deal in honest." She smiled against his shoulder. "Fair enough." More time passed. The voices below had gone quiet, and Eliza assumed Jack's men had fallen asleep. She was drifting herself, exhaustion finally overcoming cold and fear, when Caleb spoke again. "If we get out of this," he said, "what will you do?" "You mean when we get out of this?" "Sure. When?" "I don't know. I've spent so long just trying to survive, I haven't thought much about after." She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to have a place of my own. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere permanent. Somewhere I could stay." "That doesn't sound like much to ask for." "It is when you've never had it." "Yeah, I suppose it is." "What about you?" she asked. "What would you do if you could stop running?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I don't know if I know how to stop. Been moving so long I'm not sure I'd know what to do if I stood still." "Maybe you'd figure it out." "Maybe." The conversation lapsed again, but the silence felt different now. More comfortable. Like they'd crossed some invisible line from strangers to something else. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering into the cave. Below, Jack's men began to stir, their voices carrying clearly in the morning air. "Storm's past," one of them said. "We should get moving." "Give it another hour," Jack replied. "Let the trail clear a bit. They can't have gotten far in this." Eliza and Caleb remained frozen on their ledge, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they heard the sounds of the camp being broken down, horses being saddled. "We'll head up the main trail," Jack said. "They would have tried to push through the storm, probably ended up freezing to death somewhere. We find the bodies, we go home." The voices faded as the men left the canyon. Eliza and Caleb waited another 30 minutes before attempting to climb down. Her ankle had stiffened overnight, and the descent was agony. Caleb had to practically carry her the last 10 feet. On the ground, she tried to put weight on the ankle and immediately collapsed. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. "It's worse," she said through gritted teeth. "Yeah, I can see that." He looked at the cave entrance, thinking, "We can't travel like this. You need rest, and that ankle needs wrapping properly. We don't have time. We make time. Pushing yourself until you can't walk at all doesn't help anyone." He was right, and she knew it. But the thought of staying in one place, of being vulnerable, made her stomach churn with anxiety. Caleb must have seen it on her face because he said, "I'll keep watch. You rest. We'll move tonight when it's dark." "You can't stay awake another whole day." "Watch me." He helped her back to the fire pit and got a new fire going while she wrapped her ankle as tightly as she could with strips torn from an extra shirt. The swelling had gotten worse overnight, purple and angry. She didn't think it was broken, but it was close. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Every sound made Eliza jump, convinced Jack and his men were coming back. But the canyon remained quiet except for the drip of melting snow and the occasional cry of a bird. Caleb kept his word, staying alert while she dozed fitfully. When she woke in the late afternoon, she found him cleaning his rifle, his movements methodical and practiced. "You really never sleep, do you?" she asked. "I sleep when I can afford to." "And when's that?" "Hasn't happened in about 5 years." She believed him. There was something in the way he carried himself, always tense, always ready, like a man who'd learned the hard way that letting your guard down got you killed. As darkness fell, they prepared to move. Caleb had fashioned a rough crutch from a tree branch, and it helped take some weight off her ankle. The horse's leg had improved slightly, enough that it could carry their supplies if nothing else. They left the canyon under cover of darkness, moving slowly and carefully. Every step sent pain shooting through Eliza's leg, but she gritted her teeth and pushed through it. Complaining wouldn't help anything. Caleb led them north again, but this time he avoided the obvious routes, instead following deer trails and natural features that would hide their passage. It was slower going, but harder to track. Around midnight, they stopped to rest. Eliza collapsed against a tree, breathing hard. "How much farther?" she asked. "To where?" "To wherever we're going. There's a settlement about 40 miles north of here. Small place, mostly trappers and prospectors. They don't ask many questions." 40 miles. She looked at her ankle. "Might as well be 400. We'll make it." "You sound sure." "I am sure." He knelt beside her, checking her ankle. "Because we don't have any other choice." He was right about that, too. They'd committed to this path the moment they left Cutter's Ridge. There was no going back now, only forward. They traveled for 3 more nights like that, hiding during the day and moving under cover of darkness. Eliza's ankle slowly improved, though it still throbbed with every step. The landscape grew more rugged, the mountains giving way to dense forests and rocky outcroppings. On the 4th night, as they crested a ridge, Caleb pointed down into a valley below. Through the trees, Eliza could see lights. "That's it," he said. "Deadwood Creek." The settlement was even smaller than she'd expected, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a frozen stream, but it represented safety, or at least the closest thing to it they'd had in days. "Think Jack will follow us there?" she asked. Probably, but it'll take him time to figure out where we went, time we can use." They descended into the valley as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. The settlement was just starting to wake up, smoke rising from chimneys, doors opening as people began their day. Caleb led them to a small building at the edge of town with a hand-painted sign that read, "Rooms." Inside, an old woman looked them over with sharp eyes. "Need a place to stay," Caleb said. "Got money?" He put coins on the counter. The woman counted them, then nodded. "Rooms upstairs, 3rd door on the left. No noise after 10. No guests." "Understood." The room was small and cold, with a single bed and a wash basin. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and after days in the wilderness, it felt like luxury. Eliza sat on the bed while Caleb barred the door and checked the window. When he was satisfied they were as secure as they could be, he finally let himself relax slightly. "We made it," Eliza said. "We did." "Now what?" Caleb looked at her, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived together. "Now we figure out how to stay alive long enough to actually live." The first week in Deadwood Creek passed in a blur of caution and careful routine. Caleb took work at the lumber mill on the edge of town, using a name that wasn't his own. Eliza stayed in the room mostly, her ankle still healing, watching the street below through the gap in the curtains. They moved like ghosts, trying not to be noticed, trying not to leave impressions in people's memories. It didn't work. "You're the new couple, aren't you?" The woman who ran the general store leaned across the counter, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Been here almost 2 weeks now." Eliza had come down for supplies, her ankle finally strong enough to walk without the crutch. She forced a smile. "That's right. Don't get many new folks this time of year, too cold for most people's taste." The woman wrapped the bacon and flour Eliza had purchased. "Your husband find work all right?" "Yes, ma'am. At the mill." "Good place. Honest work. You planning to stay permanent?" "We'll see how it goes." The woman's expression shifted slightly, becoming more knowing. "Running from something, are you?" Eliza's hand moved instinctively toward her coat pocket, where she kept the small gun. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't." The woman pushed the wrapped goods across the counter. "Word of advice, though. If you're trying not to be noticed, your husband shouldn't have put that man through a table at the saloon last night." Eliza's stomach dropped. "What?" "Didn't he tell you? Some drunk miner got handsy with one of the girls. Your man stepped in, things got heated." The woman shrugged. "Miner's fine, just embarrassed. But people talk. And now everyone knows there's a newcomer in town who's handy with his fists. Eliza paid and left quickly, her mind racing. When she got back to the room, Caleb was there, cleaning dried blood from his knuckles. "Were you going to tell me?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Tell you what?" "About the fight." "Wasn't a fight. Was barely a scuffle. The whole town is talking about it. Let them talk. We're supposed to be keeping our heads down, Caleb, not making ourselves memorable." He finally looked at her, and she saw the flash of anger in his eyes. Guy had his hands all over a woman who was telling him no. What was I supposed to do? Walk away, like you've been doing for 5 years. The words came out harsher than she intended, and she saw them land. Caleb's jaw tightened, and he went back to cleaning his knuckles. "Can't walk away from everything," he said quietly. Eliza sat down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I know, I'm sorry, I just—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "I keep waiting for Jack to walk through that door. Every footstep in the hall, every voice outside, I think it's him." "I know. Do you think he's still looking?" "Yeah. Men like Jack don't give up easy, but we bought ourselves some time." He stood, walking to the window. "We just need to be smart about it." "And getting in bar fights is smart?" Said it was a scuffle, not a fight. He almost smiled. "But point taken. I'll try to be less conspicuous." The next few days he was. Caleb went to work at the mill and came back without incident. They ate their meals in the room rather than at the boarding house table. They spoke to people only when necessary, giving short answers that discouraged further questions. But Deadwood Creek was too small for true anonymity. People noticed them despite their efforts. The old woman who owned the boarding house started leaving extra firewood by their door. The man at the mill invited Caleb to a card game. The woman from the general store nodded knowingly whenever she saw Eliza. "We can't stay here," Eliza said one night, 3 weeks after they'd arrived. "It's too small, too easy to find us." "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know, somewhere bigger. Somewhere we can actually disappear." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "There's a town about 80 miles east of here, Silverton, big enough that strangers don't stand out. Growing fast with the silver mines." "You've been there?" "Once, a few years back." He looked at her. "But moving means risking the trail again, and your ankle—" "My ankle is fine. I can ride." "For 80 miles in winter?" "If I have to, yes." He studied her face, and she met his gaze without flinching. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll leave in 3 days. Gives me time to collect my wages and get supplies." Those 3 days felt longer than the weeks that had come before them. Eliza found herself jumping at shadows, convinced every stranger on the street was one of Jack's men. She barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of being caught, of seeing that scarred face in the doorway. On the second night, Caleb came back to the room earlier than usual. His expression was grim. "What happened?" "Man at the mill was asking questions about us today. Where we came from, why we're here. Said he'd seen us somewhere before but couldn't place where." "You think he knows Jack?" "Don't know, but I'm not waiting to find out." He started gathering their things. "We leave tonight." "It's already dark." "Good. Harder to follow in the dark." They packed quickly and quietly, leaving most of what they'd accumulated behind. Better to travel light and fast. Caleb left money on the dresser for the old woman, more than they owed. Then they slipped out through the back stairs. The stable was dark and quiet. They saddled their horses in silence, working by feel more than sight. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she tightened the cinch, whether from cold or fear, she couldn't say. They were leading the horses out into the alley when a voice stopped them. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" Eliza spun around. A man stood in the shadows at the stable entrance, his shape barely visible in the dim light. Not Jack. The voice was wrong, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. "Who are you?" Caleb's hand moved to his gun. "Easy now. I'm not here to cause trouble." The man stepped forward into the faint moonlight. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and calm eyes. "Name's Porter. I run the mill." "What do you want?" "To give you a warning. That man asking questions today, he's not from around here. Showed up this afternoon, started talking to anyone who'd listen. Described the two of you perfectly." "Why are you telling us this?" Porter smiled slightly. Because I've been where you are. Long time ago, different circumstances. But the running, that I understand. He pulled something from his coat and held it out. Map shows a route through the back country that'll get you to Silverton without using the main roads. Harder going, but safer. Caleb took the map slowly, suspicion clear on his face. Why help us? Let's just say I believe in giving people a second chance. Whatever you're running from, I hope you find a way to stop. Porter stepped back into the shadows. There's a line shack about 15 miles northeast, near the fork in Miller's Creek. You can rest there tonight. It's not much, but it's shelter. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as he'd appeared. Eliza looked at Caleb. You think it's a trap? Maybe, but we don't have a lot of options. He studied the map in the faint light. Line shack is real enough. I've seen it before. Question is whether anyone else will be there waiting. Only one way to find out. They rode out of Deadwood Creek heading south, then circled back north once they were clear of town. The temperature had dropped again, and their breath steamed in the frigid air. Eliza pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth, but it didn't help much. The route Porter had marked took them through dense forest and across frozen streams. Several times they had to dismount and lead the horses through terrain too treacherous to ride. Eliza's ankle ached constantly, but she didn't complain. Pain was better than being caught. They found the line shack exactly where Porter had marked it, a small log structure nestled in a stand of pines. Caleb approached carefully, rifle ready, but the place was empty. No signs of recent occupation, no tracks in the snow except for deer and smaller game. Inside was basic but dry. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a single bunk with a straw mattress. Caleb got a fire going while Eliza tended the horses in the lean-to attached to the back of the shack. Think Porter was telling the truth, she asked when she came back inside. About being where we are? Don't know. But he helped us, and that's what matters right now. They ate cold food, not wanting the smell of cooking to give them away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and whistling through gaps in the logs. The fire threw dancing shadows across the walls, and for a moment Eliza let herself imagine they were safe. It was a dangerous illusion. We can't keep running forever, she said. I know. So what's the plan? We get to Silverton, then what? Wait for Jack to find us again? Silverton's big enough we can actually hide. Change our names, our appearance, start over properly. And when Garrett sends more men, because he will, Caleb, he doesn't give up on things he thinks he owns. You got a better idea? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. We could go to him. What? Garrett. We could go to him, end this. That's insane, is it? Right now we're on the defensive. We're prey. But if we go to him, if we confront him on our terms, we'd be dead before we made it through his door. Maybe. Or maybe we'd catch him off guard. Nobody expects their prey to turn around and attack. She looked at Caleb. You said it yourself. You're tired of running. Well, so am I. Going after Garrett isn't stopping running. It's suicide. Then what do you suggest? He didn't have an answer, and they both knew it. The truth was, there were no good options. They could run until they died of exhaustion or old age, or they could stand and fight and probably die anyway. Neither one was appealing. We get to Silverton first, Caleb said finally. Set ourselves up, get our bearings, then we figure out the next step. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Eliza nodded, too tired to argue anymore. They took turns sleeping, one keeping watch while the other rested. When it was Eliza's turn to sleep, she dreamed of the wagon where Caleb had found her, of freezing to death alone in the cold. But in the dream, when he pulled back the canvas, he kept walking. Left her there to die. She woke with a start, gasping. Easy. Caleb was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Just a dream. Yeah. She tried to slow her breathing, tried to shake off the lingering fear. Just a dream. But it had felt real. The cold, the loneliness, the certainty that she would die alone and forgotten. It took several minutes for her heart to stop racing. You want to talk about it? Caleb asked. Not really. Fair enough. He went back to the fire, adding another log. The light from it illuminated his profile, throwing half his face into shadow. He looked tired, she realized, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with lost sleep. "When was the last time you were happy?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her, surprised by the question. "What?" "Happy. Content. When was the last time you felt like that?" He thought for a long moment. "I don't know if I ever have been. Not really. Not even as a kid? Especially not then." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you?" "There was a moment right before my mother left. I was 6, like I told you. She was teaching me to braid my hair. We were sitting on the porch of whatever house we were living in then, and the sun was warm and she was humming something. I don't even remember what." Eliza smiled at the memory. "I felt safe, like nothing could hurt me as long as she was there. Then she left. And I learned that feeling safe was just an illusion. Maybe it doesn't have to be." She looked at him. "You believe that?" "I'm trying to." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. This man who'd built his entire life around not trusting anyone, not connecting with anyone, was trying to believe in something better. Because of her, she realized. Because he'd chosen to help her, and that choice had somehow changed him. Or maybe it had changed both of them. They left the line shack before dawn, following Porter's map through terrain that tested both them and the horses. The route wound through narrow passes and across frozen highlands where the wind cut like knives. More than once, Eliza wondered if they'd survive the journey even if Jack never found them. But slowly, mile by painful mile, they made progress. The landscape began to change, the dense forest giving way to rolling hills dotted with mining operations. They saw more signs of civilization, roads, fence lines, the occasional distant building. On the 5th day out from Deadwood Creek, they crested a ridge and saw Silverton spread out in the valley below. It was bigger than Eliza had expected, a real town with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance she could hear the faint sounds of industry. "That's it," Caleb said. "That's where we disappear." They rode down into the valley as the sun was setting, joining the flow of traffic on the main road. Miners heading home from their shifts, wagons carrying ore and supplies, people going about their evening business. Exactly what they needed. Enough activity that 2 more strangers wouldn't be noteworthy. Caleb found them a room in a boarding house on the east side of town, run by a woman who barely looked at them as she took their money. The room was small and spare, but it had a lock on the door and a window that faced the street. "First thing tomorrow, we get new names," Caleb said, dropping their saddlebags on the floor. "New story, new everything." "What names?" "You pick yours, I'll pick mine. Less likely to slip up that way." Eliza thought about it. She'd been Eliza Vance her whole life, for better or worse. Becoming someone else felt strange, but maybe that was the point. "Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah Miller." "Why Sarah?" "It was my mother's name." Caleb nodded. "I'll be Thomas. Thomas Blake." "Why Thomas?" "No reason, just sounds normal." They spent the evening working out their story. They were married, coming from a mining town in Colorado where the vein had run out. Thomas was looking for work in the mines here. Sarah would take in sewing or washing if needed. They kept it simple, nothing elaborate enough to trip them up. The next morning, Caleb, Thomas now, went looking for work while Eliza, Sarah, explored the town. Silverton was everything Deadwood Creek hadn't been. Big enough to get lost in, busy enough that people minded their own business. She could walk down the street without feeling every eye on her. It felt like freedom, or the closest thing to it she'd known in years. She was coming out of the general store when she saw him. Jack Reeves, standing on the corner across the street, talking to 2 men she didn't recognize. Her heart stopped. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then instinct kicked in. She turned away casually, keeping her face down, and walked in the opposite direction. Not running. Running would draw attention, just a woman going about her business. She made it around the corner before she allowed herself to move faster. Her mind raced. Jack was here. In Silverton. How? Had someone in Deadwood Creek talked? Had Porter betrayed them after all? It didn't matter how. What mattered was getting back to the boarding house, warning Caleb, and getting out before Jack saw them. She was 2 blocks from the boarding house when a hand grabbed her arm. Well, well, Eliza Vance. She spun around, yanking her arm free. It wasn't Jack, it was one of his men, the one from the saloon in Cutter's Ridge. Up close, he was even uglier than she remembered, with dead eyes and a cruel mouth. "You got the wrong person," she said, her hand moving toward her pocket. "I don't think I do." He grabbed her arm again, harder this time. "Jack's been looking for you. Gonna be real pleased when I bring you in. Let go of me." "Not a chance. You're worth $500. Dead or alive. That's what Garrett's offering now." $500. A fortune out here. No wonder Jack had found them so quickly. With that kind of money on the table, every bounty hunter and desperate prospector in 3 territories would be looking for her. "I said let go." The man laughed. "Or what? You gonna scream? Go ahead. Nobody in this town cares what happens to some—" She shot him. Not to kill. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, clutching at the wound, his face twisted in shock and pain. Eliza ran. Behind her, she could hear shouting, people reacting to the gunshot. She didn't look back, just ran, her ankles screaming protest with every step, her lungs burning in the cold air. She burst through the door of the boarding house and took the stairs 2 at a time. Caleb was in their room, already moving, having heard the shot. "What happened?" "Jack's here. One of his men grabbed me. I shot him." "You killed him?" "No, but he'll talk. We have to go. Now." Caleb grabbed their bags, already packed because he'd never fully unpacked, always ready to run. They went down the back stairs and out through the kitchen, the boarding house keeper shouting something after them that Eliza didn't catch. The stable was chaos, people running toward the sound of the gunshot. They used the confusion to grab their horses and ride out the north end of town, joining a group of miners heading to the claims in the hills. Only when they were well clear of Silverton did they break away from the group, heading west into rough country. "This is it," Eliza said, once they'd put a few miles between them and the town. "This is how it ends, running until we die or they catch us." "No." "No?" "Caleb, they're never going to stop. You saw what happened back there. $500, that's— I know what it is." He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to face her. "And you were right. Back at the line shack, you were right. We can't keep running. So what do? We end it. Tonight." "How?" His expression was grim, determined. "We give them what they want. We go back to Silverton and we face Jack, on our terms, our ground." "That's crazy." "Yeah, but running is crazier." He looked at her and she saw something new in his eyes. Not resignation, but resolve. "I'm done being prey, Eliza. It's time to be something else." She thought about it, thought about all the running and hiding and fear, thought about the woman she'd been when Caleb found her, broken and ready to die. And the woman she was now, who'd shot a man rather than be taken. "All right," she said, "let's end this." They circled back after nightfall, leaving their horses hidden in a grove of cottonwoods a mile outside town. The walk back gave Eliza time to think about what they were doing, and with each step, the insanity of it became clearer. "We need a plan," she said. "Walking in there without one gets us killed." "I know." Caleb stopped at the edge of the tree line, studying the lights of Silverton below. "Jack's staying at the hotel, big place on Main Street. I saw him go in this morning before everything went sideways." "So we go there? Just knock on his door?" "Something like that." "That's not a plan, Caleb. That's suicide with extra steps." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face was hard and determined. "You know what your problem is? You think too much. Sometimes you just have to move and trust your instincts." "My instincts are telling me this is a terrible idea." "Mine too. But we're doing it anyway." He started walking again. "We go in through the back, find out which room he's in, then we have a conversation." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where we convince him that going back to Garrett empty-handed is better than the alternative." "And what's the alternative?" "He doesn't go back at all." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eliza had shot a man today, but that had been panic, self-defense. This was different. This was premeditated. This was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "You ever kill anyone before?" she asked quietly. "Once." The marshal's brother I told you about. He was quiet for a moment. Hasn't gotten easier with time. But you do it again. For you? Yeah. The simplicity of it took her breath away. Not because it was romantic or noble, but because it was true. This man she'd known for less than a month, who'd found her dying in a wagon, was willing to kill for her, willing to die for her. Why? The question came out barely more than a whisper. Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because for the first time in 5 years, I feel like I'm running toward something instead of away, and I'm not ready to give that up. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and followed him down the hill. Silverton was quieter now, most of the miners having retreated to the saloons or their homes. The streets were nearly empty except for the occasional drunk stumbling home, perfect for what they needed. They approached the hotel from the alley behind it. Caleb tried the back door and found it unlocked. Inside was a narrow hallway that smelled of old cooking grease and tobacco. They could hear voices from the front of the building, the night clerk talking to someone. "Wait here," Caleb whispered. He moved down the hallway with surprising quiet for a man his size, disappearing around the corner. Eliza pressed herself against the wall, her hand on the gun in her pocket, counting her heartbeats. He was back in less than 2 minutes. "Third floor, room 12. Clerk says he came in about an hour ago with a man who matched the description of the one you shot. He survived then." "Apparently. Clerk said they brought him to the doctor, patched him up. He'll live." Eliza wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. She'd never wanted to kill anyone, but she'd also never wanted to be hunted like an animal. They took the back stairs, moving slowly to minimize the creaking of old wood. The third-floor hallway was dimly lit by a single lamp at the far end. Room 12 was the second door on the left. Caleb put his ear to the door, listening. After a moment, he nodded. "I can hear voices. At least 2 people." "What now?" "Now we knock." "That's it? We just knock?" "You got a better idea?" She didn't. Caleb raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed down the hallway. The voices inside went quiet. Footsteps approached the door. "Who is it?" Jack's voice, suspicious and alert. "Hotel management," Caleb said, pitching his voice lower. "Got a complaint about noise." A pause, then the sound of a lock being turned. The door opened a crack, and Jack's scarred face appeared in the gap. His eyes widened when he saw them. Caleb hit the door hard, slamming it into Jack and sending him stumbling backward. They were inside before Jack could recover, Eliza closing the door behind them while Caleb had his gun out and pointed. The room was small, barely large enough for the bed and a single chair. The man Eliza had shot was sitting on the bed, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale. He started to reach for the gun on the nightstand, but Caleb's voice stopped him. "Don't." The man froze. Jack recovered his balance, his hand moving toward his own gun. "I wouldn't," Eliza said quietly. She had her gun out now too, pointed directly at his chest. "We're already wanted for shooting your friend there. What's one more?" Jack's hand stopped, but he didn't look particularly worried. If anything, he looked almost amused. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Walking right into the lion's den." "We're done running," Caleb said. "That's so. Well, you're also done living then, because there's no way this ends with you walking out of here." "We'll see about that." Caleb gestured with his gun. "Sit down, both of you." Jack moved slowly to the chair while his injured companion stayed on the bed. Neither one looked frightened, and that worried Eliza more than if they had been. These were men who'd been in tight situations before, men who knew how to wait for an opening. "So what's the plan here?" Jack asked, settling into the chair like he was at a Sunday social. "You shoot us both, then what? Whole town heard the shot earlier. They'll hear these ones too. You'll be dead or in chains before morning." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe we have a different ending in mind." "I'm listening." "You go back to Garrett. Tell him Eliza's dead. Tell him whatever you want, but you leave her alone." Jack laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "And why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is we kill you right now." "No, you won't. You're not killers. I can see it in your eyes." Jack leaned forward slightly. "You talk tough, but when it comes down to it, you won't pull that trigger, and we both know it." Eliza felt her hand trembling slightly. He was right, at least about her. She'd shot the man on the bed, but that had been reflex, panic. Could she actually kill someone in cold blood? Looking into their eyes and pulling the trigger? She didn't know. "You're wrong about that," Caleb said quietly. "I've killed before. I'll do it again if I have to." "Sure you will. But killing me doesn't solve your problem. Garrett will just send someone else. And someone after that. He's not going to stop until he gets what he's owed." "He's not owed anything. Those were her father's debts. Debts passed to family. That's the law. That's Garrett's law. Real law says different." Jack shrugged. "Real law doesn't matter out here. You know that. Only law that matters is the law of men with enough money and enough guns. And Garrett has both." Eliza stepped forward, her gun steady now despite the trembling in her hands. "What if I could pay him?" That got Jack's attention. "What?" "The debt. What if I could pay it?" "You got $4,000 hidden somewhere." "No. But I have something Garrett wants more than money." "And what's that?" "Information." She looked at Caleb, hoping he'd understand, hoping he'd trust her. "I worked for Garrett for 3 years. I saw things, heard things. I know where he keeps his ledgers, the ones that show who he really works for. I know about the judge in his pocket, the sheriff he pays off, the mining claim he stole using forged documents." Jack's expression shifted slightly. "Not much, but enough." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Ask me about the warehouse on Fletcher Street, the one where he stores goods that came in from the Eastern Territories without paying customs. Or ask me about the woman he had killed 2 years ago because she threatened to go to the federal marshals." The room went very quiet. The man on the bed was staring at her with wide eyes, and even Caleb looked surprised. "You can prove any of this?" Jack asked carefully. "I can tell people where to look. Tell them what questions to ask. Even if half of what I say doesn't stick, it's enough to make Garrett's life very difficult. Enough that he'd lose the protection he pays for. Enough that real law might actually touch him." Jack sat back, thinking. Eliza could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the value of bringing her back against the risk of what she might say if pushed too far. "Garrett doesn't like being threatened," he said finally. "This isn't a threat. It's a negotiation." She lowered her gun slightly, a gesture of good faith. "I want to be left alone. Garrett wants to protect what he's built. We both get what we want if you walk away." "And if I don't?" "Then I start talking to anyone who'll listen. Federal marshals, territorial judges, newspaper reporters. I'll burn Garrett's empire down, even if it means burning with it." It was a bluff, at least partly. She knew things, yes, but whether any of it was enough to actually hurt Garrett was questionable. But Jack didn't know that. And in poker, what you didn't know mattered more than what you did. Jack studied her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Then he looked at his injured companion. "What do you think?" The man on the bed shifted uncomfortably. "I think she's crazy enough to do it. And Garrett don't pay us enough to deal with federal marshals." "No, he doesn't." Jack stood up slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going back to Garrett. I'm going to tell him you're dead. Killed in a shootout trying to escape. Body burned beyond recognition in a cabin fire." "He'll want proof," Caleb said. "I'll give him proof. Some burnt bones, a piece of jewelry you wore. Garrett doesn't like loose ends, but he'll accept it if I sell it right." Jack moved toward the door, and Eliza and Caleb parted to let him pass. "But here's the thing. If I ever see you again, if you ever surface anywhere that Garrett might hear about it, the deal's off. You stay dead, you stay safe. Understood?" Eliza nodded. "Understood. And the information you have about Garrett's business, that goes to the grave with you, figuratively speaking. It's as long as he leaves me alone." "He will, because you're dead, and dead people can't cause problems." Jack opened the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't blame you for running. Garrett's a bastard, but he's a powerful bastard, and crossing him is usually fatal. You got lucky tonight." Then he was gone, his injured companion following behind him, leaving Eliza and Caleb alone in the empty hotel room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Eliza's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the bed, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaking. "Did that really just happen?" she asked. Caleb holstered his gun. "I think so." Do you believe him? That he'll tell Garrett I'm dead? Yeah, I do. He sat down beside her. Jack's a lot of things, but he's practical. You gave him a way out that doesn't involve bodies or federal attention. He'll take it. What if he doesn't? Then we deal with it. But I think we just bought ourselves something we haven't had in a long time. What's that? A future. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that it could be that simple, that they could just walk away and start over. But years of running had taught her not to trust in happy endings. We should leave Silverton, she said. Tonight, just in case. Agreed. But this time, we're not running. We're choosing where to go next. He stood and offered her his hand. Come on, let's get our horses and get out of here. They left the hotel the same way they'd come in, through the back and into the alley. The town was quiet, most people asleep or too drunk to notice two more shadows moving through the darkness. At the stable, they saddled their horses quickly and rode out heading east this time, toward the lowlands and the promise of warmer weather. They rode through the night without stopping, putting as many miles as possible between themselves and Silverton. Dawn found them in rolling hills covered in sparse grass and scattered trees. The temperature had risen noticeably, and for the first time in weeks, Eliza didn't feel like her fingers were going to freeze off. They stopped beside a creek to water the horses and rest. Eliza knelt by the water, splashing the cold liquid on her face, feeling the sting of it wake her up. Where are we going? She asked. Caleb was studying a map he'd pulled from his saddlebag. There's a settlement about 50 miles east of here, called Redemption, if you can believe that. Redemption. She smiled despite herself. Fitting, isn't it? He folded the map. It's growing fast. Railroads coming through in a year or so. Lots of people moving in, building businesses. Good place to start over. You've been there? No, but I've heard about it. Supposed to be the kind of place where your past doesn't matter much. Only thing that matters is what you do now. Sounds too good to be true. Maybe it is, but it's worth a look. They mounted up and rode on, the morning sun warming their backs. The landscape continued to change, becoming greener and more hospitable. They passed farms and ranches, saw cattle grazing in wide pastures, signs of civilization, of people building lives. Around midday, they crested a hill and saw a small farm in the valley below. It was modest but well kept, with a house, a barn, and fields that showed signs of recent planting. A man was working near the barn, and when he saw them, he waved. Afternoon, he called out as they rode closer. You folks lost? Just passing through, Caleb replied, heading to Redemption. Long ride. You're welcome to water your horses and rest a bit if you like. They accepted the offer gratefully. The farmer's name was Henderson, and he had a wife and two young children who watched Eliza and Caleb with wide, curious eyes. Mrs. Henderson insisted they stay for lunch, and it seemed rude to refuse. They ate at a rough-hewn table in the yard, simple food that tasted better than anything Eliza had eaten in weeks. You folks married? Mrs. Henderson asked, her eyes moving between them with that particular look married women got when they thought they'd spotted romance. Eliza and Caleb exchanged a glance. No, ma'am, Eliza said. Well, you should be. Way you look at each other. She smiled. Been married 15 years now, and I still remember that look, the one that says you'd follow each other into fire. Eliza felt her face heat. It's not like that. Sure it's not. Mrs. Henderson's smile widened. Just remember, when you get to Redemption, there's a preacher there who does real nice ceremonies. Not expensive either. After lunch, Henderson walked them back to their horses. You running from something? He asked quietly when his wife was out of earshot. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Henderson raised his hands. Easy now. I'm not judging. Just curious. I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but the running, that I understand. What made you stop? Eliza asked. Henderson looked back at his house, where his wife was playing with their children. Found something worth staying for. Realized that running forever wasn't living. So I stopped, built this place, and I've been here ever since. They ever catch up with you? The people you were running from? Some of them tried, but I wasn't alone anymore. Had my wife, had neighbors who didn't ask too many questions. Made it harder for trouble to find me. He looked at Caleb. My advice? Find a place, put down roots, build something. The running only ends when you decide it ends. They thanked him and rode on, his words echoing in Eliza's mind. Find a place. Put down roots. Build something. It sounded simple when he said it, but simple and easy weren't the same thing. They reached Redemption 3 days later, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The town was bigger than Silverton, more established. Buildings of brick and stone instead of just wood, streets laid out in an actual grid, signs of permanence. They found a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Crawford, who didn't ask questions, just took their money and showed them to a clean room with 2 beds. You planning to stay long? She asked. Maybe, Caleb said. Depends on whether we can find work. Always work available for people willing to do it. My late husband used to say this town was built on sweat and stubbornness. She paused at the door. You two look like you've got plenty of both. After she left, Eliza went to the window and looked out at the town below. Lights were coming on in windows, people moving about their evening routines. Normal life, the kind she'd never really had. Think this is it? She asked. Think this is where we stop? Caleb came to stand beside her. I don't know, but it feels different than the other places. Feels like somewhere you could actually build something. Henderson said running only ends when you decide it ends. He's right. So we decide. Right now, we stop running, we stay here, and we build something. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you want to build? A life. A real one. Not just surviving day to day, but actually living. She turned to look at him. With you. If you want that too. His expression was hard to read in the fading light. I've been alone a long time, Eliza. I'm not sure I know how to be any other way. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together. He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. The look of a man standing on the edge of something, trying to decide whether to jump. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, we can try. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't a promise of forever, but it was honest, and that mattered more than pretty words. The next morning, they started figuring out what building a life actually meant. Caleb found work at a construction company that was putting up new buildings on the edge of town. Eliza got a job at a dressmaker's shop, her years of mending her own clothes making her useful with a needle. They moved into a small house 3 weeks later, nothing fancy but theirs. 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a porch that faced west toward the sunset. The landlord was an old man who'd lost his wife the year before and was happy to rent to a couple who seemed stable. First month in advance, he said. After that, we'll see how it goes. Eliza paid him with money she'd saved, and they moved their few possessions in that same afternoon. It wasn't much, a couple of bags, some clothes, the guns they'd carried through the mountains. But it was theirs. That night, they sat on the porch watching the sun go down, and for the first time in months, Eliza felt something close to peace. You think Jack kept his word? She asked. About telling Garrett I'm dead? Yeah, I do. How can you be sure? I can't, but at some point you have to stop looking over your shoulder, have to trust that maybe, just this once, things worked out. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe they were finally safe. But old habits died hard, and she still caught herself watching the street, noting faces, planning escape routes. It would take time to unlearn the fear. Maybe years. Maybe forever. But she had time now. They both did. 3 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and Redemption continued to grow. New people arrived almost daily, drawn by the promise of the railroad and the opportunities it would bring. Caleb's construction company had more work than they could handle. Eliza's skills with the needle were in high demand. They fell into a rhythm, a routine that felt dangerously close to normal. Wake up, work, come home, eat dinner together on the porch. Small talk about their days, comfortable silences that didn't need filling. One evening, in late June, Eliza came home to find Caleb sitting on the porch steps, holding a piece of paper. What's that? She asked. He looked up, and she saw something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Land deed. There's a parcel about 5 miles north of here, 20 acres. Good soil, water access. Man selling it is moving east, wants to sell quick. How much? $300. It was a fortune. More money than either of them had. But Caleb was looking at her with an expression that was almost hopeful, and she realized what he was really asking. "You want to buy it," she said. "I want to build something permanent, not just rent someone else's house and work someone else's job. I want land that's ours, a house we build ourselves." He stood up. "I know it's a lot of money. I know it's a risk, but—" "Yes." He stopped. "Yes? Yes, let's do it. Let's buy the land and build something permanent." The smile that crossed his face was the first truly unguarded one she'd ever seen from him. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They bought the land with money they'd saved and a loan from the bank that would take years to pay off. The first thing they did was walk every inch of it, planning where to put the house, where to plant crops, where to dig a well. "Here," Caleb said, standing on a slight rise that overlooked the valley. "House goes here." Eliza stood beside him, imagining it. A real house with real walls and a real roof. A place that was theirs, that no one could take away. "It's perfect," she said. They broke ground the next week, Caleb working on the house every evening after his construction job and all day on Sundays. Eliza helped when she could, learning to measure and cut and hammer. It was hard work, exhausting work, but it felt good in a way nothing else ever had. By fall, they had walls and a roof. By winter, they had windows and a door that locked. They moved in on Christmas Eve, their few possessions looking lost in the empty rooms. "We need furniture," Eliza said, looking around. "We'll get it, one piece at a time." They spent that first night on the floor in front of the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. "You happy?" Caleb asked. Eliza thought about it. Happy seemed like too small a word for what she felt. Satisfied, maybe. Content. Like she'd finally stopped running and realized she'd been running toward this all along. "Yeah," she said, "I think I am." Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning their land into a sea of mud that clung to everything. Caleb spent his days working the soil, preparing it for planting, while Eliza divided her time between the dressmaker's shop and fixing up the house. They were building something real, something that felt permanent, but the ghost of their past still lingered in quiet moments. Eliza still checked the road every morning, still noted every stranger who passed by, still kept her gun within reach. "You think it'll ever go away?" she asked one evening as they sat on their porch. "The waiting for something bad to happen?" Caleb was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. That's not very reassuring." "You want reassuring? You married the wrong man." She smiled at that. They'd gotten married in March, a simple ceremony at the church in town with Mrs. Crawford and a couple of their neighbors as witnesses. Nothing fancy, just a promise made in front of people who'd become something close to friends. Eliza had worn a dress she'd made herself, and Caleb had looked uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that was slightly too small. It had been perfect. "I didn't marry you for reassurance," she said. "I married you because you're the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't running alone." He looked at her then, and the expression on his face made her chest tight. "Yeah, same." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. This land they'd bought, this house they'd built, this life they were creating, it all felt fragile somehow, like one strong wind could blow it all away. But it was theirs, and that mattered. The first real test came in May. Eliza was walking back from town with supplies when she saw a man standing at the edge of their property, looking at the house. Her heart jumped into her throat, and her hand went immediately to the gun in her pocket. But it wasn't Jack Reeves. This man was older, stockier, with a full beard and clothes that marked him as a farmer or rancher. "Help you?" she called out, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. The man turned and smiled. "You must be Mrs. Blake. I'm your neighbor, Tom Patterson. Got the spread about 2 miles west of here." She relaxed slightly, but didn't take her hand off the gun. "Nice to meet you. Just wanted to introduce myself, see if you folks needed anything. Moving in this time of year can be rough." "We're managing fine, thank you." Patterson nodded, but he didn't leave. Instead, he looked at the house, the turned soil, the beginnings of their life. "You and your husband do all this yourselves?" "Most of it. That's good work, real good work." He paused. "Mind if I give you some advice?" Eliza tensed. What kind of advice? The friendly kind. "See, I've been out here 5 years now, seen a lot of folks come and go. Ones who make it are the ones who learn to trust their neighbors. Out here, you need people you can count on when things get hard. And they will get hard. We can take care of ourselves. I'm sure you can, but there's a difference between taking care of yourself and being part of something bigger. He tipped his hat. Anyway, my wife's having a gathering next Sunday. Just neighbors, nothing fancy. You and your husband should come. We'll think about it. You do that. Patterson started to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Whatever you're running from, whatever brought you out here, nobody around here cares. We all got our reasons for being where we are. But being suspicious of everyone gets exhausting. Sometimes you gotta take a chance on people. He left before she could respond, walking back toward his own property with an easy gait. Eliza stood there for a long moment, his words echoing in her head. Sometimes you gotta take a chance on people. When Caleb came home that evening, she told him about Patterson and the invitation. What do you think? She asked. I think he's right. We can't live our whole lives waiting for the other shoe to drop. So we go? We go. The gathering at the Patterson place turned out to be bigger than Eliza expected. At least 20 people, all from neighboring farms and ranches. They were friendly in that cautious way of frontier people, welcoming but not prying, interested but not invasive. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a force of nature, a woman in her 40s with a laugh that could probably be heard a mile away. She took one look at Eliza and declared them friends, then proceeded to introduce her to every other woman there. This is Mary Henderson. She's got the farm south of here. And this is Clara Morrison. Her husband runs the feed store in town. And this is... The names blurred together, but the warmth didn't. These were people who understood hard work and harder winters, who knew what it meant to build something from nothing. People who didn't ask where Eliza and Caleb had come from because they understood that the past was sometimes best left alone. Caleb ended up in a corner with the men, talking about crops and weather and the best way to dig a well. Eliza watched him from across the room and saw something she'd never seen before. He looked relaxed, almost at ease. Your husband's a good man, Mrs. Patterson said, appearing at Eliza's elbow with a cup of coffee. Quiet, but good. Tom says he's got the look of someone who's seen trouble. We've both seen our share. Haven't we all? Mrs. Patterson smiled. That's why we're out here instead of back east in some city. Fresh start, clean slate, all that. You think it's really possible to start over completely? I think it's possible to build something new. Whether you can completely forget what came before. She shrugged. Probably not. But you can choose what you carry forward and what you leave behind. The evening wore on, and by the time they left, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Connected. Like she was part of something larger than just her and Caleb. Like they had neighbors who would help if things got bad, and who they could help in return. That wasn't so terrible, Caleb said as they rode home under a sky full of stars. No, it was actually nice. Think we can do it? Actually be part of this community? I think we have to try. And they did try. Over the next few months, they became regulars at church socials and barn raisings. They helped Patterson repair his fence after a storm damaged it. They traded work with the Hendersons during harvest. Slowly, carefully, they wove themselves into the fabric of the community. But the past wasn't done with them yet. It was late August when the rider came. Eliza was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard the horse approaching. She looked up and felt her blood run cold. The man was young, maybe 20, with a badge on his chest that caught the sunlight. A territorial marshal. She stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands, her mind racing. Had Jack talked? Had someone recognized them? Were they about to lose everything they'd built? Ma'am, the marshal said, tipping his hat. I'm looking for Thomas and Sarah Blake. I'm Sarah Blake. Is your husband around? He's working in the back field. What's this about? The marshal dismounted. I have some news about a man named Victor Garrett. The name hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over a year, and just the sound of it brought back everything. The fear, the running, the constant looking over her shoulder. I don't know anyone by that name, she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. I think you do, ma'am, but that's not why I'm here. The marshal pulled a folded paper from his coat. Victor Garrett was arrested 3 months ago on charges of fraud, extortion, and murder. Trial was quick. He was hanged 2 weeks ago. Eliza's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the fence post to steady herself. What? Seems some information came to light about his business dealings. Federal marshals got involved. Once they started digging, they found enough to hang him 10 times over. The marshal held out the paper. This is a notice declaring all debts held by Garrett's estate null and void. Anyone who worked for him or was bound to him in any way is released from those obligations. She took the paper with trembling hands. The words swam in front of her eyes, but she could make out enough. Garrett's name. Legal terms she didn't fully understand, but the meaning was clear. She was free. Actually, legally free. Why bring this to me? She asked. The marshal's expression was kind. Because someone made sure your name was on the list of people to notify. Anonymous tip to the marshals. Whoever it was knew a lot about Garrett's operation. Jack Reeves. It had to be. He'd done more than just tell Garrett she was dead. He'd made sure of it, made sure she could never be dragged back. Thank you, she managed to say. Yes, ma'am. You take care now. He rode off, leaving Eliza standing in the garden with the paper clutched in her hands. She stood there for a long time, the tomatoes forgotten, trying to process what had just happened. Garrett was dead. Actually dead. Not just in the story Jack had told, but really dead. Hanged for his crimes. All those years of fear, of running, of looking over her shoulder, it was over. She walked to the back field in a daze. Caleb was repairing a section of fence, his shirt soaked with sweat. He looked up when he heard her approach, and his expression shifted immediately to concern. What happened? She handed him the paper. He read it slowly, his face unreadable. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It's over, she said. It's really over. Yeah. He folded the paper carefully. Yeah, it is. They stood there in the field, the sun beating down on them, and Eliza felt something break loose inside her chest. All the fear she'd been carrying, all the tension of waiting for the past to catch up, it crumbled away, leaving her feeling lighter than she'd felt in years. I don't know what to do now, she said. What do you mean? I've spent so long running, so long being afraid. I don't know how to just live without that hanging over me. Caleb stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Then we figure it out, together. That's what we've been doing anyway, isn't it? Figuring it out as we go? Yeah, I guess it is. That night they sat on their porch and watched the stars come out. The paper from the marshal sat on the table between them, proof that their past was finally, truly finished. You think Jack did it? Eliza asked. Gave the information to the marshals? Probably. He was practical. Easier to make sure Garrett couldn't come after you than to keep looking over his shoulder wondering if Garrett would send someone else. I wish I could thank him. I think staying alive and being happy is probably thanks enough. She thought about that, about how strange it was that Jack Reeves, the man who'd hunted them across half the territory, had ended up being the one to truly set them free. The months that followed felt different, lighter somehow, like they'd been carrying weights they didn't even realize until they were gone. Eliza stopped checking the road every morning. Caleb stopped sleeping with his gun under his pillow. They started making plans that extended beyond the next season, beyond the next year. In October, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after dinner, her hands shaking slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. I'm going to have a baby. He stared at her for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her into a hug so tight it almost hurt. We're going to have a baby, he said, like he was testing the words out. Are you happy about it? Happy? He pulled back to look at her. Eliza, I'm terrified. But yeah, I'm happy. They told the Pattersons first, then the Hendersons, and soon the whole community knew. The women rallied around Eliza with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offers to help. The men started building a cradle in the barn at the Patterson place, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to construct it. Caleb worked harder than ever, adding another room to the house, making sure they had enough firewood stockpiled for winter, preparing for a future that suddenly felt very real and very close. The baby came in May, early morning when the sun was just starting to paint the eastern sky pink. Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women from the community attended the birth while Caleb paced outside, wearing a path in the dirt. It was a girl, small but healthy, with a surprisingly loud cry and a full head of dark hair. When they finally let Caleb into the room, he stood at the bedside staring down at the tiny person in Eliza's arms, like he'd never seen anything quite like it. "Want to hold her?" Eliza asked. "I don't know how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." He took the baby carefully, awkwardly, like she might break. She squirmed and made a small noise, and his whole face softened in a way Eliza had never seen before. "She needs a name," Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway. Eliza and Caleb looked at each other. They'd discussed names but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at this tiny person who represented everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, Eliza knew what she wanted to call her. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Caleb nodded, still staring at his daughter. "Hope Blake. That works." The years that followed weren't easy. Farming never was. There were droughts and early frosts, crops that failed, and animals that got sick. There were lean winters when they had to stretch every penny and hope it was enough. But they weren't alone anymore. The community rallied when things got hard, sharing what they had, helping each other through. The Pattersons were there when their well ran dry, helping them dig a new one. The Hendersons shared their harvest when a hailstorm destroyed Eliza and Caleb's crops. And when Patterson's barn caught fire, every able-bodied person in 20 miles showed up to help rebuild it. Hope grew into a wild, happy child who ran through the fields and helped with the animals and asked endless questions about everything. When she was 3, Eliza got pregnant again. This time it was a boy they named Samuel. 2 years after that, another girl, Emma. The house that had seemed too big when they'd first built it suddenly felt too small. Caleb added on, one room at a time, as their family grew. The land that had been raw and unworked when they'd bought it became productive, yielding crops that kept them fed and provided enough surplus to sell. They weren't rich, probably never would be, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Hope was 7, she asked about grandparents. All her friends had them, she said. Why didn't she? Eliza and Caleb exchanged a look across the dinner table. Your grandparents are gone, Eliza said carefully, but you have lots of people who love you. The Pattersons and the Hendersons and all our neighbors, they're like family too. But it's not the same, Hope insisted with the logic of a child. No, Caleb agreed. It's not the same. But sometimes the family you choose is just as good as the family you're born with. Hope seemed to accept that, and the conversation moved on to other things. But later, when the children were in bed, Eliza found herself thinking about it. Do you think about them? She asked Caleb. Your parents? Sometimes. Not as much as I used to. He was sitting by the fire, working on a new handle for the plow. What about you? I think about my mother sometimes. Wonder where she went, what happened to her. Eliza was mending one of Samuel's shirts. But mostly, I think about how different things could have been if you hadn't found me that morning in Cutter's Ridge. You would have survived. You're too stubborn not to. Maybe. But I wouldn't have had this. She gestured around the room. The house, the children, the life. I would have kept running until I couldn't run anymore. We both would have. Yeah, we both would have. The fire crackled, and outside they could hear the wind in the trees. Comfortable sounds. Home sounds. You ever regret it? Caleb asked. Stopping? Settling down? Never. Not once. She set down the mending. What about you? I regret a lot of things in my life. But this? He looked around the room, at the cradle in the corner where Emma slept, at the toys scattered on the floor, at the life they'd built. This is the one thing I got right. When Hope was 10, a stranger came to town asking questions. He was looking for a woman named Eliza Vance, he said. Had business with her regarding her father's estate. Mrs. Morrison at the feed store told him she didn't know anyone by that name. So did the bartender at the saloon and the clerk at the general store. The stranger left frustrated, and that night Tom Patterson rode out to warn them. He's still in town, Patterson said. Staying at the hotel. Asking a lot of questions. Caleb's hand went to where his gun used to hang. He didn't wear it anymore, hadn't in years, but the instinct was still there. We could leave, Eliza said. Pack up tonight. Be gone before morning." "No." Caleb's voice was firm. "We're not running anymore. This is our home. These are our children. We don't run." "Then what do we do?" "We deal with it, together." The next morning, Caleb rode into town and found the stranger having breakfast at the hotel. He was younger than Caleb expected, barely 30, with the look of a lawyer or clerk rather than a gunman. "You looking for Eliza Vance?" Caleb asked without preamble. The stranger looked up, surprised. "You know her?" "I knew her, long time ago. She's dead." "Are you sure?" "I have information suggesting I'm sure. She died years back. Fever took her." The stranger studied Caleb's face, looking for deception. "That's unfortunate. I represent her father's family back east. They wanted to make amends, leave her an inheritance. Her father's family wanted nothing to do with her when she was alive. Bit late to make amends now. Nevertheless, if there are any surviving relatives, there aren't." Caleb stood. "Eliza Vance is dead. She died alone and scared and running from people who should have protected her. If her father's family cared, they would have cared then, not now." He left before the stranger could respond. By evening, word had spread through town that the man had given up his search and left. Caleb never found out if the inheritance story was real or if it had been some kind of trap. It didn't matter. Eliza Vance was dead. Sarah Blake was alive, and she was staying that way. The children grew. Hope became a teenager with her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength. Samuel grew into a boy who loved the land and the animals and talked about one day having his own farm. Emma was still young, but she showed signs of being the wildest of them all, fearless in a way that both terrified and delighted her parents. The railroad finally came through, just like everyone had predicted. Redemption grew from a town into a small city. New people arrived almost daily, bringing new ideas and new opportunities. Caleb's construction skills were in demand, and he started taking jobs in town, building houses and shops for the newcomers. Eliza expanded her dressmaking, training 2 young women from town, and eventually opening a small shop on Main Street. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it brought in steady money. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. More than comfortable. They were happy. On their 10th anniversary, they had a party. It wasn't anything fancy, just their neighbors and friends gathering at the house for food and music and celebration. Mrs. Patterson had made a cake, and Tom had brought out his fiddle. As the sun set and the children ran wild in the yard and the adults talked and laughed, Caleb pulled Eliza aside. "I got you something," he said. "We agreed no gifts." "Yeah, well, I'm not good at following rules." He handed her a small wooden box. "Made it myself." Inside was a ring, simple, made of silver with a single small stone. Not expensive, but carefully crafted. "We got married so fast I never got you a proper ring," he said. "Figured it was about time." Eliza's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. "It's perfect." He slipped it onto her finger, and she looked at it, catching the fading sunlight. 10 years. 10 years since she'd been a woman freezing to death in a broken wagon, and he'd been a drifter with no place to call home. 10 years of building a life together, one day at a time. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. "What?" "We did it. We actually did it. We stopped running, and we built something real." "Yeah, we did." They stood there watching their children play, watching their friends celebrate, watching the sun set on their land. This life they'd built from nothing, from desperation and determination and a single act of kindness in the freezing dawn. "You think she would have believed it?" Eliza asked. "That woman in the wagon, if you could have shown her this, the house, the children, the life, you think she would have believed it was possible?" Caleb thought about it. "No, I don't think she would have. Me neither. I was so sure I was going to die there, so sure that was how my story ended. Guess we were both wrong about how our stories ended." "Yeah, guess we were." The years continued to pass, as years do. The children grew into young adults. Hope married a young farmer from a neighboring property. Samuel took over more and more of the farm work as Caleb's joints started to ache. Emma showed no signs of settling down, much to her mother's exasperation and secret delight. Eliza and Caleb grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing. But the core of who they were, Two people who'd found each other in the cold and decided to stop running. That never changed. On a spring morning, 25 years after they'd first arrived in Redemption, Caleb woke before dawn and found Eliza already awake, looking out the window at the land they'd built their life on. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how far we've come. About that morning you found me." She turned to look at him. "I've never properly thanked you for that, for not walking past. You've thanked me every day for 25 years, in 100 different ways." "Have I?" "Yeah. Every time you smile at something one of the kids says, every time you reach for my hand without thinking about it, every time you choose to stay when you could have run." He got out of bed and joined her at the window. "That's all the thanks I ever needed." The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Their land stretched out before them, fields ready for planting, animals stirring in the barn, the life they'd built with their own hands. "You think it was worth it?" Eliza asked. "Everything we went through to get here?" Caleb thought about the running and the fear and the cold nights in the wilderness. Thought about the desperation and the violence and the constant looking over their shoulders. And then he thought about Hope's wedding last summer, about Samuel's pride in his first successful harvest, about Emma's laughter echoing through the house. "Yeah," he said, "it was worth it." And standing there in the early morning light, watching the sun rise on another day of the life they'd chosen, Eliza had to agree. It had all been worth it. Every frozen mile, every terrified moment, every desperate choice that had brought them here, to this place, to this life, to each other. They'd started as strangers in the cold, two people running from different pasts. They'd become partners, then lovers, then spouses. They'd built a home and raised children and created something permanent in a world that had tried to make them temporary. And in the end, that was everything. That was more than Eliza had ever dreamed possible that morning in Cutter's Ridge, dying in a broken wagon, alone in the cold. She reached for Caleb's hand, and he took it without hesitation. 25 years together, and some things never changed. Some things never needed to. "Come on," she said. "We've got work to do." "Always do." They walked together out to the porch to watch the sunrise, the same way they'd done almost every morning for a quarter century. And as the light spread across their land, warming the earth and waking the world, Eliza thought about endings and beginnings, and how sometimes they were the same thing. That morning in the wagon had been an ending. The end of Eliza Vance, the woman who ran from everything and trusted nothing. But it had also been a beginning. The beginning of Sarah Blake, the woman who'd learned to stand still, to build, to trust. The woman who'd transformed survival into something more, into a life, into a legacy, into love.